At the meeting, representatives of Arab nations lashed out at the U.S. air raid on Libya. The paper cautioned that the incident may arouse latent anti-Japanese sentiment in some Asian nations. He said he is aware that strike-prone workers in those countries are not necessarily lazy. The party is leaning toward selecting a scholar as a candidate to back in the forthcoming mayoral election. According to the ministry, Japan's grain imports in January leaped 29% over a year before. The foreigner was delighted when a bag he had left behind in a taxi was given back to him. Many Japanese hoped in vain for a lenient verdict to be passed on the South Korean dissident leader. The council urged the government to restructure the Japanese economy so as to lessen the country's dependence on exports. None of the Japanese swimmers were able to get a medal in the Olympics, let alone win a race. Experts studied how to prevent leaks of lethal radioactive gas from the crippled nuclear reactor. The eligible voters for the party presidential primary included 170,000 associate party members. The new JNR Shinkansen trunk line, linking the northern part of Japan and the Tokyo metropolitan area, was inaugurated on June 23, 1982. The Sumon disease was linked to the taking of a drug called quiniform, which was used for treatment of intestinal diseases. The official retracted his earlier statement that Japan and South Korea share the same destiny. The surgeon performed an operation on the patient to remove cancerous tissue from his liver. In a delicate operation, the brain surgeon cut a tumor from an area near a vital nerve. The earthquake and subsequent fires leveled a number of buildings and houses in the city. The organization is engaged in liaison work between Japanese settlers in South America and their relatives in Japan. The Chinese leader said that China does not have the military strength at present to liberate Taiwan. Unit 1. Nearly 100 people, including 30 rebel force troops, died in the abortive coup attempt. China abrogated the 30-year-old Mutual Assistance Treaty with the Soviet Union. She says that such an abrupt change in the education policy would cause terrible confusion. The business leader noted that the impact of the oil crisis was absorbed successfully in Japan. Participants in the meeting wondered how he could say such an absurd thing. The opposition camp accused the Prime Minister of alleged abuses of authority in the case. The minister's criticism of the anti-pollution campaign by the victims only served to accelerate their movement. The auditorium near the disaster site was used to accommodate the mourners during the religious ceremonies. The UN Secretary General said he was unsuccessful in accomplishing his mission to mediate the dispute. Projecting the budget deficit accurately seems to be almost as hard as controlling it. The official says the refugees gradually got accustomed to their new life in the country. He says the Soviet Union is acutely aware that nuclear war with the United States could be devastating. He is scheduled to address the conference on behalf of the survivors of the atomic bombings. The company adhered to the initial plan to construct an assembly plant in the United States. They unanimously agreed to set up an ad hoc committee to investigate the bribery case. Parliament is to adjourn for the year-end and New Year recess. It will be resumed late in January. The government will first have to adjust its policy to incorporate opinions on the issue held by the ministries concerned. According to observers in Washington, the outgoing Secretary of State has staunch adversaries in the White House. The hospital is the first in the world which is designed to prevent the spread of deadly diseases by aerial infection. The crisis has been further aggravated after the president's efforts to put an end to the conflict failed. He stressed in the speech that many atom bomb survivors later died in great agony. The ailment he is suffering from is described as not serious, although he had to give up his trip. Under a Japanese-Chilean joint fishery project, 1 million salmon eggs were airlifted to Santiago. A South Korean who runs a textile factory in Osaka was found by authorities to be an illegal alien. The U.S. presidential envoy shuttled between Tel Aviv and Beirut to alleviate tension in Lebanon. The defense agency demanded that more money be allocated in the budget to purchase the sophisticated aircraft. The resolution calls on the Prime Minister to make an all-out effort to clear the bill. The workers' demands included a small allowance for an improvement in living standards. The President vowed to carry out a drastic government spending cut along with an economic policy review. They demanded that the government alter its policy to make a considerable increase in defense spending. The U.S.-Soviet talks on strategic arms reduction are being held alternately at their missions in Geneva. The military junta has designated the Army General as interim president of the country. An exhibition from the Soviet Union of fossils of extinct animals has opened in Tokyo. He emphasized that the agreement was hammered out through mutual compromise and not through unilateral concessions. Peking warned that such an act by the Reagan administration would hinder mutual understanding. They are expected to discuss the current impasse over the American access to Japanese procurement contracts. According to UN officials, millions of flood victims are on the verge of starvation. The market sources say that the latest climb in share prices is due mainly to psychological factors. He pointed out the strong tendency of enterprises to build factories overseas to cope with sluggish exports. This kind of species builds a mound-type nest out of sand and withered leaves, and leaves eggs in it to hatch unattended. Unit 2. The party leader appealed that Japan should not spare money in developing an alternative energy resource to oil. The ambiguous remark by the Prime Minister has triggered a rumor that general elections are nearing. Several ambulances rushed to the scene of the railway accident which injured scores of people. The two countries have signed a new amity, commerce, and navigation treaty. Prosecutors say there is ample evidence that he was implicated in the payoff case. The U.S. aircraft carrier Midway is now anchored at its home port in Yokosuka. Arab countries repeatedly protested against Israel's annexation of eastern Jerusalem in 1967. He called for the total abolition of nuclear weapons, saying that they could annihilate mankind. The donation was made by an anonymous gentleman to help educate disabled children. The plaintiffs demanded that the company apologize to them for having caused trouble. The Chinese group is scheduled to visit various factories manufacturing educational apparatus. The U.S. government seems to be irritated by what it believes is an appeasement policy toward the Soviets adopted by its Western allies. The U.S. Treasury Department demanded that the Japanese electric appliance industry pay anti-dumping duties. Even opposition parties have highly appraised the Prime Minister's address calling for nuclear disarmament. The approximately 300 participants in the rally included some 30 foreign activists. Arbitration efforts are underway to avert a 3-day nationwide transport strike scheduled for next week. archaeological studies in China have made remarkable advances since the communist takeover. Dr. Kissinger is regarded as one of the principal architects of Sino-American normalization. The pipeline stretches from the Arctic Sea to the Pacific coast of Alaska. The unification of ban-the-bomb meetings resulted from ardent efforts by non-affiliated youth and women's groups. Both sides want to continue negotiations round the clock before the strike is launched. They ascribed his arrogant attitude to his mother's lack of discipline during his childhood. A ruling party panel has proposed a partial revision of the war-renouncing article of the Constitution. A prominent religious leader was shot dead by an unknown assailant in a Tehran suburb. The general says such a hasty assault would cause unnecessary loss of life. The scholars have adopted a resolution to do all they can to protect cultural assets. The world was astonished at the news that the Swedish Prime Minister was assassinated. The ruling party had held only a paper-thin majority at best before the election. At issue in the negotiations is a U.S. demand for the liberalization of farm imports by Japan. All parties, including the Communist Party, which was at odds with Peking, supported ratification of the treaty. The vehicle has attained a maximum speed of 330 kilometers per hour in test runs. The weather observation satellite surveyed natural resources and conducted astronomical and marine studies. 50 to 70 passengers are feared to have drowned after an overloaded bus plunged into a lake. The Japanese delegate emphasized that one nuclear mishap could lead to a world catastrophe. Heavy casualties were reported and piles of debris were seen along the streets in the aftermath of the strong earthquake that leveled many buildings in Mexico City. The party suffered a stunning defeat in the general election and lost much of its pre-election strength. The patient who was hospitalized 2 weeks ago shows no visible sign of recovering. He said that the latest U.S. decision will not be endorsed by NATO and certainly not by his government. He called for a drastic plan to bail out small export-oriented firms suffering serious damage from the appreciation of the yen. The government is facing the need to compile a very austere budget for the next fiscal year due to huge revenue shortfalls. Unit 3. The scholar said authentic information on China's space activities is not available. The newspaper quoted authoritative sources as saying that Vietnam will soon withdraw part of its troops from Kampuchea. Avalanches have killed and injured many people in the Himalayan foothills. The official disclosed that the political detainees will be awarded amnesty to mark the president's inauguration. They allege that the government is promoting military cooperation between Tokyo, Seoul, and Washington with the U.S. as an axis. The talks were held against the backdrop of increased tension between two countries over bilateral trade. Those who had been arrested in connection with the theft of computer secrets were freed on bail. Following the coup, the former president was banished from the country by the military junta. The soldiers fired 200 mortar shells and a barrage of rockets into the border area. Both countries have claimed sovereignty over the barren and uninhabited islands. A group of demonstrators went on a rampage after clashing with riot police. The Chinese army deployed several battalions along the disputed border area with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union has succeeded in beaming a television signal to cosmonauts aboard the orbiting space station. The results of the local elections will have an important bearing on the next general elections. Japanese nationals have evacuated West Beirut, leaving most of their personal belongings behind. The bereaved families of those who died in the fire filed a lawsuit against the hotel owner. Japan's first nuclear-powered ship, the Mutsu, had long then berthed at the port of Sasebo. The police station was besieged by hundreds of angry people and set on fire later. The highest decoration was bestowed on the general for his years of service. The conference, which was supposed to end today, has been extended for another day due to last-minute hitches. In the bet on the title match, odds are 7-3 in favor of the defending champion. The family became well off financially at the sacrifice of their leisure time. Both biological and chemical studies are going on to find effective anti-cancer agents. They say such blatant and criminal actions are proof of its hostile policy toward the nation. The blazing oil well has so far spread an oil slick about 100 kilometers long by 65 kilometers wide. The disease is characterized by a high fever with swelling and bleeding from the joints. Reports from Beirut say Israeli forces crushed PLO strongholds within the blink of an eye. The hijacker threatened to blow up the airplane unless $1 million was paid to him as ransom. The recent situation resulted in blunting the edge of the Arab oil weapon. He has just returned from a board of directors meeting at the International Energy Agency in Paris. Japan's trade representative says that the farm trade negotiations in Washington have bogged down. Police say the group sold more than 100 of the bogus Louis Vuitton handbags in Japan. The party chairman has been re-elected to his 7th consecutive term of office. They maintain that an early dissolution of the lower house would obscure the probe into the payoff scandal. Officials from the International Red Cross distributed food among the refugees. He said rectifying the trade imbalance is a prerequisite for improved bilateral relations. The civic group applauded the government's move to tighten regulations against reckless driving. A joint communique about the agreement was issued simultaneously in Washington and Peking. At first, the physician diagnosed the deadly illness as just an upset stomach. The party leader vowed to bolster the party's strength in the upcoming general election. Unit 4. The Israeli forces have launched a large-scale counterattack, spearheaded by a naval bombardment. The company president said management will never bow to unreasonable demands by labor. Japan says the U.S. embargo of oil development equipment is a breach of international law. Both sides continued negotiations persistently to avert a possible breakdown. The Arab country broke off diplomatic relations with Egypt after it signed a peace treaty with Israel. During the meeting, the church leader brought up the accusation that the regime is repressing political freedom. In brisk trading, the Dow Jones average of 225 active issues recorded a new high of 17,600 yen. China charged that Japanese authorities were covering up a historical fact concerning brutal mass murders in Nanking. The company has developed the world's smallest television set, a wristwatch with a built-in picture screen. The intelligence report says the bulk of Chinese forces have gathered along the border. A news bulletin from Shanghai reported that a Chinese airliner has been hijacked. A record bumper crop of rice this year will leave a huge surplus of 6 million tons in stock. 2 bundles of yen notes worth $10,000 were stolen from an unlocked drawer. The top leader's efforts were not sufficient to buoy up the world economy. Critics say Japan's well-established bureaucracy is sure to survive the ongoing administrative reform. The burglar threatened the bank manager at gunpoint and forced him to open the safe. The airliner made an emergency landing at the airport after one of its 4 engines burst into flames. A byproduct of nuclear power generation, warm water, is widely used to raise fish as it quickens the growth period. The subsequent blast is reported to have killed 3 firefighters and many bystanders. The winner of the ruling party's presidential election becomes the next prime minister by virtue of its majority strength in parliament. The super-partisan delegation is to leave Tokyo tomorrow for Hanoi by way of Bangkok. The U.S. gross national product, calculated on a yearly basis, rose by 1.7% in the second quarter. The military junta has so far failed to calm down the runaway inflation in the Latin American country. The colored TV plant will have an annual production capacity of 180,000 sets. Citizens gave a hero's welcome to Americans who returned home after 14 months of captivity in Iran. The Italian president asked the prime minister, who lost a vote of confidence, to stay on as a caretaker. China gave up the idea of carrying on the ambitious development program because of its foreign currency shortage. The bill was introduced to an extraordinary session of Parliament last year and carried over into this year's regular session. The United States fear that the Soviet Union may increase its influence, cashing in on the unstable situation in the Mideast. Mechanical failure or human error could provoke a catastrophe if maximum security precautions are not taken. The automaker is making its utmost effort to expand its sales network to catch up with its rivals. The defendant claimed that checks at customs offices are tantamount to censorship banned by the Constitution. China conducted a national census, the first in 18 years, with 5 million census officers mobilized. Among depression-stricken districts are production centers of ceramics and marine products. The grounding of the DC-10s followed the administration's suspension of the plane's design certificate. The sharp rise in the yen's value dealt a heavy blow to the metal tableware industry, which relies mainly on exports. The Liberal Democratic Party has won an overwhelming victory in the general election. Chinese spectators are all delighted at the kabuki drama because they say kabuki has something in common with Peking opera. The incident is believed to be unprecedented in modern civil aviation history. Certified car exports last month rose to $2 billion, spearheaded by sales to the United States. Unit 5. Anti-nuclear demonstrators marched to the UN headquarters chanting, "No more Hiroshimas, no more Nagasakis." The party Secretary General instructed the party's local chapters to step up preparations for the general elections. The presidential envoy had a plain-side chat with reporters upon his arrival in Beirut. The complete defeat of the PLO shattered a long-cherished dream of the Palestinians. The chronicle of arms control negotiations shows that disarmament is no easy task. Under the present circumstances, it seems difficult for the president to seek re-election. An exhibit of ancient Mexican civilization attracted a number of people in Tokyo. Some party members insist that the politician should leave the party to clarify his political and moral responsibility. The negotiations have been delayed due to clause-by-clause discussions on the treaty. The company says it accepted the out-of-court settlement so as not to trouble its clients in the U.S. anymore. In the sports meet, the runner clipped 3.1 seconds off his own previous world record. police are hunting clues in the murder of a Japanese wife in Los Angeles. The former Secretary of State says he believes the president lacks a coherent foreign policy. More than 60 people were injured when dozens of houses and shops collapsed in the quake. The news agency reports the president fell into a coma as the gunshot wounds worsened. In the final stage of the negotiations, they came across a new difficult problem. The peace treaty came into force 5 years ago after a long period of negotiations. 4 hijackers who commandeered the plane are reported to have surrendered to Libyan authorities. World Environment Day was set up to commemorate the UN Conference on Human Environment in Stockholm in 1972. Japan has been commended by other nations for reducing its current account surplus. The death sentence passed on the dissident has been commuted to 20 years of imprisonment. The situation compelled the government to give up its target of a 5.2% economic growth rate. At a news conference, the president called his new cabinet united, forceful, and competent. The white paper stressed the need for making merchant vessels of Japanese registration more competitive. The corporation allowed foreign companies to bid on contracts for such equipment as telecommunications components. A freight train in a switchover operation in a station compound crashed head-on with an approaching passenger train. The government worked out a comprehensive energy-saving plan which calls for a departure from oil-based power generation. The company decided not to fill positions left open after workers retire at the compulsory retirement age. The PLO leader appealed for his comrades to fight against Israeli troops till the end. The company has been charged with concealing deals relating to the dumping of steel products in the United States. The communist leader severely criticized the recently announced Socialist Party concept of the Reformist Coalition. The Prime Minister serves concurrently as President of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party. In the testimony, he confessed that he took $2.5 million from a trading house. 2 Polish sailors sought political asylum in the United States while their ships stayed at the port. A South Korean newspaper charged that the textbook at issue attempts to justify Japan's past colonial rule over the Korean peninsula. Japan decided to discontinue commercial whaling in 1988 in accordance with the International Whaling Commission's decision on a moratorium. The government handed over a protest note to the charge d'affaires at the Iranian embassy in Tokyo. More than 500 people were killed and thousands injured in a series of gas explosions on the outskirts of Mexico City. When Japanese nationals were repatriated from China to Japan after World War II, she was left behind. The cabinet minister's remark contradicts the latest disclosure of a confidential diplomatic cable. Unit 6. Many of the victims are still confined to bed with their limbs paralyzed. The seized fishing boat was confiscated along with its gear and fish catch. U.S. space probes reached a climax with man's conquest of the moon in 1969. The young man who stabbed 2 girls and their mother to death showed no sign of conscience. The Education Ministry should have been conscious of deep-rooted resentment among some Asian nations. The ruling party officials consulted with the opposition parties to obtain their consent to the parliamentary timetable. The Chinese paper warned that Washington will be fully responsible for any consequences resulting from it. The fact-finding team will consist of members of parliament from all parties. He said the troop withdrawal should be conducted in a manner consistent with maintenance of peace and stability in the region. The American businessmen argue that their acts do not constitute a crime in their home country. He says that many primary school teachers seem to have no definite conception of how to teach morals or ethics. They contended that foreseeing a flood of that immensity was beyond human capability. At a joint news conference, the 7 leaders expressed content with the outcome of the summit meeting. The official says the United States is ready to dispatch a contingent of Marines to the country to help evacuate American nationals. The government has formally decided to convene an extraordinary session of Parliament on September 16th. The foreign minister conveyed the government's decision to the U.S. ambassador to Japan. The executive says he is convinced there was nothing illegal concerning the purchase of the information. The radio says the 2 leaders held political talks in a cordial and friendly atmosphere. The suspected bank robber broke through a police cordon and is still at large. Refrigerators, washing machines, and cosmetics are among the new line of consumer goods being produced in China. He dismissed his defense counsel because he said he was dissatisfied with the way they handled the case. Police say, so far, 29 counterfeit checks have been cashed at the bank branch. The representatives from the European Community Commission paid a courtesy call on the Prime Minister. China's modernization programs are largely dependent on foreign investments on a deferred payment basis. The protest began last week, criticizing covert American intelligence activities in the country. The neutron bomb is designed to kill only living creatures with buildings and equipment left intact. The Indonesian government refused to accept the credentials of the newly appointed U.S. ambassador to Jakarta. Favored by generally fine, crisp autumnal weather, Nikko and Hakone were crowded with tens of thousands of people. At their first meeting, they agreed to discuss new criteria for emergency evacuation plans. The crucial issues to be discussed include the proposed revision of criminal law. He says the government tried hard to prevent another round of inflation triggered by the oil crunch. He brushed aside reports that his company is on the brink of bankruptcy. The labor leader says that considering the rise in the price of commodities, the wage increase is only a nominal one. The Japanese envoy will coordinate views with the U.S. government on the agenda for the coming summit meeting. He alleged that U.S. relations with third world countries have eroded under the Reagan administration. The island is a popular honeymoon resort located 150 kilometers off the peninsula. He said the recent Soviet military buildup on the islands is a menace to the security of Japan in the Far East. He said the United States is plagued by a huge national debt and unemployment. Parliamentary business is at a standstill because of a confrontation between the ruling and opposition parties. 12 Japanese fighter planes from 3 nearby bases were scrambled to trail the Soviet planes. Unit 7. The researchers were introduced to China the know-how for cultivating rice in cold climates. The cumulative U.S. trade deficit with Japan in the first quarter of this year amounted to about $10 billion. Police say in a report that youngsters are apt to become drug addicts out of curiosity. OPEC oil ministers are expected to discuss a plan to curtail its oil production. A dozen people were taken into police custody after their demonstration at the U.S. Embassy in Seoul. Australia wants Japan to import more dairy products to expand two-way trade. The Tokyo Stock Exchange was dampened by speculation that the Federal Reserve Board will again raise the official discount rate. The voting results at the IOC General Meeting dashed the hope that the 1988 Olympics would be held in Nagoya. Israel said it will indefinitely continue to observe the ceasefire despite expiration of the deadline. They developed a new method to prevent tooth decay by exposing teeth briefly to a laser beam. He warned that people must not be deceived by such actions because the Prime Minister is basically a hawk. They pledged to take decisive steps to rebuild the world free trading system. The dissident leader was charged with violating a presidential decree banning anti-government activities. A statue of a goddess was unveiled at a ceremony dedicated to the souls of the war dead. Thousands of people took to the streets last night in defiance of the government-imposed curfew. He said the Afghan crisis must be diffused before it escalates into a large-scale war. Opposition parties have boycotted deliberations in Parliament in protest of the minister's remarks. A dome demolished by the atomic blast now stands as a symbol of nuclear holocaust. The U.S. Navy canceled its plan to dock a nuclear sub at the Port of New York because of its dense population. The report says political prisoners in that country were deprived of even minimum human rights. 9 people were killed when a train carrying 800 passengers derailed east of Tehran. He says ancient Japanese descended from Peking man about 100,000 to 650,000 years ago. The court rejected an appeal by a South Korean military deserter against deportation from Japan. After releasing all hostages, the hijackers killed themselves in despair. He says the situation remains desperate and that harsh measures will have to be taken. The mission's next destination is Luxembourg, the last leg of its tour of the 3 Benelux countries. The officials say they will continue to be cautious because other economic issues seem destined to arise. The campaigners strengthened their drive to reduce the use of synthetic detergents to keep rivers and lakes clean. They say the planned deployment of MX missiles in the region will raise deterrent effects. France was reported to have detonated a nuclear device in the Mururoa atoll on Sunday. They will set out for a tour on wheelchairs across the entire Japanese archipelago. The politician has categorically denied the charge that he received a bribe from a U.S. aircraft maker. The committee, comprising experts from the governments of the 2 countries, will study the plan. The purchase of the aircraft contributed somewhat to a reduction in Japan's chronic surplus in trade with Europe. Arab countries failed to draw up a plan that would have lured Egypt away from the Camp David Accords. The Portopia Exposition was held on reclaimed land near the Osaka-Kobe metropolitan area. They urged the government to guarantee stable employment and increase old age pensions. They say a withdrawal of U.S. troops from South Korea would tip the military balance in Asia substantially. Ayatollah Khomeini and other clergymen played a vital role in the Islamic Revolution in Iran. The Soviet Party organ charged that such steps are detrimental to the United States itself. Unit 8. Eyewitnesses say the wide-bodied jet crashed into the mountainside, making a hole 20 meters in diameter. The statement, issued by dissident groups in the country, denounced the president, calling him a dictator. Political and social unrest has died down, on the surface at least, since martial law was imposed in the country. Die-hard anti-airport farmers are determined to continue their struggle against the airport. A large amount of lethal radioactive fallout was diffused around the underground nuclear test site in Nevada. Sales at department stores recorded a double-digit increase in October over a year before. Prospects of the president seeking re-election have become dim since the nation's economy continues to deteriorate. The US dollar dipped below the 160 yen level momentarily for the first time on the Tokyo money market today. The official noted that the old idea that higher education is only for the elite has now been discarded. The two parties failed to normalize relations after 15 years of discord. The government was very discreet in making comments on the delicate diplomatic issue. The Chinese government rehabilitated many people who had been disgraced during the Great Cultural Revolution. The United States was relieved of its duty to defend Taiwan as a result of its rapprochement with Peking. The organization was dismantled in the late 1970s, but it was reorganized in 1982. The World Buddhist Conference decided to send a message to the United Nations, voicing dismay at the arms race. Riot police dispersed violent demonstrators when they tried to force their way into the embassy compound. On display at the exhibition are about 2,000 export items, including construction machines and machine tools. They agreed to continue discussions on such urban issues as water supply, transportation, and waste disposal. Rail and road traffic has been seriously disrupted by the torrential downpour. The Prime Minister decided to replace the Cabinet Minister to silence public dissent on the matter. The colored images telecast live from Antarctica to Japan via satellite were clear and distinct. They charged that the President's remarks were aimed at distorting world public opinion calling for nuclear disarmament. The broadcast reports that a ship on fire north of the island is sending a distress signal. A high court rejected a last-ditch attempt by lawyers to save him from the death penalty. Alaska may export oil to Japan. In exchange for oil Japan will buy from Mexico and divert to the United States. The number of divorces is continuing to rise sharply, while that of marriages is leveling off. In an era of cheap, high-tech weaponry, it seemed that big warships were doomed to be scrapped. They charged that the Prime Minister abandoned a dovish stance and began to adopt reactionary policies. She has been alive for 3 years with the help of an artificial breathing device. Bilateral relations remain chilled because of the long-standing territorial dispute. Conflicts between government troops and guerrillas developed into civil war. Ambassador Mike Mansfield made a speech at the opening ceremony of the new U.S. consulate in Sapporo. The device went off at the airport while an inspector was checking the contents of the luggage. Japan has announced another package of market-opening measures in response to criticism from abroad. They say Japan's non-tariff barriers are the greatest obstacle to U.S. exports to Japan. Relations between the two parties have deteriorated over their respective stands on the partial nuclear test ban treaty. The rapprochement has been achieved between the two nations after decades of antagonism. The politician was named in the recent court ruling as one of the recipients of questionable money. A rift was reported within the PLO, with hardliners insisting that Mr. Arafat should order an all-out attack against Israel. Floodwaters from the river, swollen by the spring thaw of ice and snow, swept through the town. Unit 9. In early returns from the elections, the Liberal Democrats are doing well. Pacifists believe that Japan can do without armaments, as stipulated in the Constitution. The size of the down payment is tentatively fixed at $1,000 million. Iranian demonstrators marched through the streets of Tehran shouting, "Down with the Shah." The scholar said the growing surplus of rice is a drain on the government budget. This problem will become a focal point of the summit conference as it draws near. The Vietnamese refugees were picked up by the Panamanian tanker while drifting in the South China Sea. Some 8,000 workers braved the drizzle today and held a morale-boosting rally to press their demands. The automaker began manufacturing dual-purpose small cars, which will be exported. He alleged that many people are becoming dubious about the credibility of the survey results. The machine gun duel took place early in the morning across the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. The results of this experiment duplicated the findings obtained 2 years ago. He emphasized that there must be durable peace and an atmosphere of mutual trust between the two countries. The fishery talks will take up the apparently dwindling deep-sea fish resources in waters between Japan and South Korea. An outlay of roughly $100 million has been earmarked for the project in the budget. The morning editions of major Japanese dailies carry the story of the attempted assassination with banners. The editorial said the move toward the resumption of dialogue between North and South Korea is an encouraging development. U.S. imports of fuel-efficient compact cars rose almost 20% in May from the previous month. A few minutes elapsed before the second severe shock of an earthquake was felt in Tokyo last night. The main theme for today's rally is job security for elderly workers who have been laid off. Despite his eloquent speeches, no one seemed to believe in the politician who was involved in the scandal. In China, 5 million interviewers embarked on the world's biggest census on July 1st, 1982. The government official was dismissed from his post after he was found to have embezzled government funds. The fundraising drive is supported by many eminent figures, including politicians, scholars, and artists. After the oil crisis, the country sent an emissary to oil-producing countries to secure stable oil supplies. Anti-airport people attempted to block flights by flying balloons and emitting smoke from burning car tires. In his TV speech, the president appealed to the people's emotion rather than to their reason. The emperor is not empowered as head of state in the Japanese constitution. A child who had been lost in the mountain narrowly escaped death by a chance encounter with a villager. He said Japan should continue its endeavor to correct the trade imbalance with the United States, which is heavily in Japan's favor. The opposition party leader expressed his anxiety over the outcome of the violent demonstration. The official's explanation failed to dispel all apprehensions about the SDI space defense project. Volcanic activity of Mount Aso further intensified overnight, with roaring eruptions rattling doors and windows. A volcano erupted on the island, and hundreds of houses were swept away by a flood of molten lava gushing out of the craters. The 3,000-ton Japanese freighter began listing to starboard after piles of lumber shifted. The People's Daily labeled some Japanese officials as elements striving to revive militarism. The survey indicates no clear-cut trend toward a full-scale recovery from the protracted business slump. 3 containers full of cash vanished from the armored car while the driver and guards were away. The unique energy-saving system uses vapor of about 100 degrees centigrade from hot springs. Most facilities for Indo-Chinese refugees in Japan are privately endowed. Unit 10. He is expected to be engaged in such work as preparations for the summit and trade negotiations. The letters were sent in an effort to enlist international support for their struggle. The Council recommended that the Japanese national railways be privatized, as it suffers an enormous cumulative deficit. The Pakistani president has denied reports that Pakistan bought equipment to separate enriched uranium. A bomb explosion ripped through the fuselage of a U.S. jetliner flying over Greece en route from Rome to Athens. A second fire broke out, and the ensuing explosion killed 10 members of the rescue team. Japan and China jointly produced a television program entitled The Silk Road. The construction of a new cable link between the two nations was entrusted to 3 Japanese firms. The government's program to reduce Japan's trade surplus envisages imports of uranium ore and aircraft for leasing abroad. The epicenter was pinpointed in a coastal desert region about 1,000 kilometers southwest of Lima. The satellite is in stationary orbit above Indonesia's Kalimantan Island on the equator. Japan will extend to India a yen loan equivalent to $150 million for social development. The pontiff prayed for eternal peace at a mass in the Peace Memorial Park in Hiroshima. The presiding judge ruled that keeping news sources confidential is a matter of journalistic ethics. China's hydroelectric resources are evaluated at a potential of 580 million kilowatts. The Thai official said the eviction of the refugees will begin immediately and will be carried out in stages. In a report on overseas economies, the agency says the expansionary trend is evident in the United States. The idea of sending self-defense forces men abroad will evoke a great deal of criticism from opposition parties. He said there would be no further talks on a joint venture if new elements do not evolve in the country's attitude. The defense agency admitted that it gave exaggerated information about a threat to Japan's security. The Prime Minister pledged to exert all efforts to eliminate deficits in state finances. The new leader exhorted the armed forces to rally completely behind the government and support its policies. He said he would lead an expedition of high school girls to the Himalayas next year. The Council advised that the government double its expenditures for research and development of geothermal power generation. They charged that the government plans to limit outlays for social welfare, education, and personnel expenses. The Prime Minister explicitly denied the possibility of early dissolution of the lower house. The hijacker, who claimed he had explosives strapped to his body, demanded $300,000 as ransom. The patient was advised not to expose himself too much to ultraviolet rays from the sun. During the meeting with the Prime Minister, the opposition leader demanded more extensive measures to secure stable employment. A handy extinguisher is becoming a standard fixture in most households in anticipation of a big quake. The resolution called on the military junta to abide by the UN Code against torture. Fierce fighting broke out in the region after a relative lull of 3 months. One of the war orphans said she was very happy that her dream of visiting her fatherland has been fulfilled. Judging from the context, the wording in the joint communiqué is interpreted to imply a military connotation. Under the Olympic formula, the national flag and anthem of Taiwan would not be used during the events. The report says heavy drinking is becoming more and more prevalent among younger generation in Japan. In the report, the Council offered both pros and cons of the issue that were discussed for years by the panel. The panel recommended that the government review such outmoded programs as the Staple Food Control System. The stolen manuals and computer technology were submitted to the district court as evidence in the industrial spying case. The United States may seek the extradition of 9 Japanese employees of the company allegedly involved in the industrial espionage case. Unit 11. The politician claimed that the story is a mere fabrication forged in an attempt to trap him. He said efforts to facilitate the conversion from oil to other energy sources should be continued. U.S. computer makers fear that they may fall behind Japanese rivals even in the field of software applications. Due to the faltering economy, the country's unemployment hit a post-war record. Fanatic rightist organizations have escalated their campaigns against the Japan Teachers Union. The first space shuttle, Columbia, was fastened onto the fuselage of a jet for a test flight in the atmosphere. An official estimate put storm-related fatalities at 290 in the worst-hit area. The First Lady stayed away from the luncheon because of fatigue caused by the long journey to Japan. The minister promised the Chinese that his ministry will study the feasibility of Japanese cooperation in the project. Japan's major labor federation, Sohyo, demanded that the government grant entry visas to all foreign delegates. Mrs. Fusae Ichikawa was one of the standard-bearers of feminism in Japan. Japanese trawlers have been barred from fertile fishing grounds off the island. The Prime Minister promised to do all he can to end the factional feud within the Liberal Democratic Party. The Communist Revolution in China helped the people get rid of feudalistic ways of thinking. The presiding judge ordered the construction firm to pay $1 million in fines. Without adequate first aid, many more people would have died in the disaster. The mayor of Hiroshima has called on world leaders to visit the city to gain first-hand knowledge of atomic holocaust. The United States has urged Japan to fit its defense program to the changing international situation. Controversy over the safety of nuclear power plants flared up again following the disaster in the Soviet Union. Inspection disclosed cracks and other flaws in engine mountings of the wide-bodied aircraft. Government leaders are reluctant to issue national bonds because of the large amount already floated. Riots flourished throughout the world in the early 1970s when student radicalism was at a peak. The Western leaders agreed on the need to intervene in foreign exchange markets to prevent excessive fluctuations of currencies. The Prime Minister did not commit himself to the often repeated promise, saying that the situation is fluid. The Premier appealed to his one-time political foes for cooperation in modernizing the country. Palestinian hardliners were dead set against any accords with Israel and insisted on fighting it out. More than 300 athletes from 25 countries participated in the meet held in Japan. After 3 days of hectic bargaining, labor management at last reached agreement. The opposition candidate in the mayoral election is known as an outspoken political critic. The business leader's remarks were apparently aimed at forestalling a possible demand for a sharp wage hike by labor. The ceremony marking the 10th anniversary of the foundation was held at the auditorium in the presence of the emperor. The Japan-Soviet fishery agreement will govern the two countries' catch quota inside each other's 200-mile zone. The article is aimed at introducing foreign readers to Japan's historic places and cultural heritage. A representative of the plaintiffs branded the ruling as a dangerous precedent. France decided to agree to the proposals, provided all the conditions it laid are met. The ruling party and two centralist parties asserted that the legislation does not run counter to the Constitution. The advanced reconnaissance planes were assigned to Iceland to help in the surveillance of Soviet activity. The government relaxed tax on land transactions in a bid to ease a serious shortage of land for housing. Then Prime Minister Suzuki virtually promised that Japan would defend sea lanes stretching 1,000 miles offshore. The lower house will approve the bill today, and the upper house will follow suit tomorrow. Unit 12. The U.S. proposal is a follow-up to the Japan-U.S. summit, during which the Prime Minister called for joint development of new energy sources. The communique says the two leaders believe the talks helped put bilateral relations on a stable footing. The resolution forbade member countries from importing whale products from non-member nations. According to an economic forecast for this year, the inflation rate will drop to less than 4%. It is a foregone conclusion in Japan that the Liberal Democratic Party president is elected Prime Minister. Japan pledged to abandon war potential for good as a means of settling international conflicts. Arab countries hesitated to extend a helping hand to the PLO because they know that Israel is a formidable enemy. The truce was requested by the U.S. envoy to try to reach a formula that would prevent fighting in Beirut. The electric power company will for the time being suspend all work on the construction of the new nuclear power plant. He said that France's independent nuclear strike force helps fortify the country against its potential enemy. Japan will increase efforts through the United Nations and other international forums to bring about peace in the area. The minister planned to foster the nation's computer industry under its guidance. Fragments of earthenware believed to be some 9,000 years old have been found on the island. Japanese workers are enjoying better fringe benefits than their counterparts in Western industrialized countries. The president announced with a frown the resignation of his national security advisor. Being frustrated by the government's weak-kneed diplomacy, people took to the streets for a demonstration. The Japanese representative proposed in a speech at the UN session to strengthen UN peacekeeping functions. Japan extended aid totaling $3 million to Burma to furnish medical equipment to the Rangoon hospital. The incident caused a furor which was later settled through diplomatic channels. The US dollar lost further ground against the yen on the Tokyo money market today. Gale force winds blew down a huge billboard onto a crowded street in downtown Tokyo. Ever-increasing amounts of garbage in urban areas now pose a serious social problem. The independent candidate garnered more votes than he had expected in the general election. Foreign visitors stood gazing at pictures depicting the devastation immediately after the nuclear blast. Police say the two accomplices escaped arrest in Manila but were captured in Tokyo. The new ambassador is well acquainted with the current situation in the Middle East. Guerrillas claim they destroyed a large ammunition dump and as many as 11 government forces planes. Japan's southernmost island of Okino-Torishima is located at a latitude of approximately 20 degrees north. They failed to find a breakthrough in stalled negotiations on the construction of a huge petrochemical complex in Iran. The prosecutors contend that the defendants committed the most savage crimes in Japan's criminal history. The socialists and communists are dead set against the proposed revision of the law. They claim that the construction of a huge crude oil depot might damage the environment if an oil leakage occurred. A group of extortionists, calling itself the Man with 21 Faces, threatened to put poisoned candies on shelves at more stores. The country's penal code defines 8 different kinds of offenses, including counter-revolution. China says a well-preserved corpse has been found in a tomb of the Ming dynasty, which ended in 1644. A national referendum was held in 1979 to decide whether or not Iran should formally end the Shah's monarchy. Highways were congested with a rush of cars leaving Tokyo for summer resorts. The criminal offenses by U.S. servicemen heightened the resentment of residents around the military base. The council recommended guidelines for experiments on artificial recombination of genes. No conclusion has been reached at the UN conference as to how to bring about genuine disarmament. Unit 13. 24 people have been diagnosed as suffering from cholera or as being carriers of the germ. The government has reiterated its promise that it is trying to get rid of dependence on deficit-covering bonds. Consumer groups charge that the government gave in to pressure from farmers to raise the price of rice. The industrial spying case gave rise to speculation that the Japanese businessmen may have been trapped. The labor leader said the Prime Minister is liable to give way to hawkish demands from within his ruling party. An air of gloom prevails over the talks with an impasse threatening to worsen bilateral relations. The Shah of Iran was in his glory before he was overturned by the Islamic Revolution. A buying mission left for Britain to go along with the government's policy of improving the bilateral trade imbalance. The peak of the labor campaign will come toward the end of this month when public service workers plan to go on strike. The Tigers grabbed the year's Central League pennant for the first time in 21 years. The official says the Chinese officials could not grasp what he really means on the issue. The Indonesian leader said he is grateful for the economic cooperation Japan extended to his country. The government leader expressed gratitude to the visiting Peruvian politician for the warm reception on his recent visit to Peru. The warning of a possible explosion underscored the gravity of the accident at the nuclear power plant. A leading aide of Iran's Ayatollah Khomeini was killed in a grenade attack during a prayer meeting. The mother of a victim of the terrorist attack collapsed in grief when his coffin was lowered into the grave. During the committee meeting, the opposition questioner grilled the government officials on the matter. He said the industrial espionage case is a reflection of grim international competition in the field of high technology. Both the Phnom Penh government and the anti-Vietnamese coalition in Kampuchea seem to be groping for a political solution to their conflict. The fire gutted the luxurious hotel, leaving nearly 100 guests killed and more than 150 injured. Sluggish individual spending, which has lasted for months, is hampering the economic recovery. Domestic jetliners were often harassed by flocks of birds near the local airport. They called on the Western leaders to work out concrete measures to help ease the hardships of refugees. The incident seems to be deeply rooted in hatred arising from racial discrimination. South Korea is expected to propose tighter controls on Japan's fish hauls in the area. On the textbook controversy, China says Japan has only to uphold the spirit of the joint communique between the two countries. A U.S. Navy spokesman says the drill has nothing to do with the reported presence of Soviet warships in the waters. China charged that the Soviet Union is conducting what it terms acts of hegemony in various parts of the world. The four heirs of the late landowner had to pay taxes equal to half of the inherited fortune. Today's rally in Tokyo by thousands of unionists heralded the start of a unified labor offensive for higher wages. The shrine is noted as a tourist spot with herds of deer roaming leisurely around. Under the tentative plan, a high-rise hotel with 1,000 rooms will be built in Peking. He is willing to assume the role of an intermediary in a dialogue between the two warring nations. Under the so-called Nixon Doctrine, the United States began to call on Japan to share more of the defense burden in the Western Pacific. The promotion of administrative reform and the establishment of political ethics were the pillars of the Prime Minister's domestic policy. He singled out as a step to stimulate the economy incentives for small and medium-sized businesses. The sumo wrestler stayed away from the tournament because he had undergone an operation for appendicitis several days before. Israel vowed to gain revenge against the PLO for the attack on the Israeli envoy in London. Whether or not to aggravate the situation now hinges on the Prime Minister's political decision. The militant students hoisted the Iranian flag from the American embassy's roof. Unit 14. The Japan-U.S. Security Treaty holds good unless one of the parties notifies the other of its intention to terminate it. The Iranian troops were holding out at the stronghold, resisting the Iraqi forces. They charged that the new U.S. measures are apt to become a hotbed of trade protectionism. A fire raged through the 6-story building, which houses many offices and shops. Commenting on the textbook controversy, a South Korean cabinet minister said the Japanese lack humane feelings. When it comes to war responsibility, the foreign minister said Japan should take a humble attitude toward other Asian nations. People in Tokyo sweltered today as hot, humid weather continued for the 5th consecutive day. In El Salvador, guerrillas inflicted a humiliating defeat on government troops. The commentator says a compromise between them, if any, will take a long time to come. The Space Center repeatedly delayed the ignition time for this shuttle because of minor troubles. The U.S. ambassador said that Washington cannot ignore the growth of Soviet military strength in the Pacific. An intense debate has begun in Parliament on alleged illicit payments to politicians by U.S. makers. Many countries are said to welcome Japanese immigrants who are experts in technological fields. He warned that the Western European nations are becoming more and more impatient over the trade imbalance with Japan. A district court judge was impeached for his malfeasance in connection with the Lockheed scandal. A North Korean official complained that the United States is impeding the reunification of Korea. The U.S. official made a remark implicitly supporting Nicaraguan guerrillas fighting against the government forces. Following the oil crisis, housewives devoted themselves to impulse buying of daily necessities, such as toilet paper and detergents. Mortar and artillery fire was heard outside the city almost incessantly. Party officials in charge of the elections are at a loss as to the low turnout. He told the rally that the government shows no inclination to try and learn from the recent accident at the Soviet nuclear power plant. The Labor Federation charges that the government is carrying out the plan in collusion with business circles. All incoming planes to the airport were requested to change their flight course so as not to be disturbed by a dense fog. He charged that the Russian diplomat's instigation of espionage is incompatible with his diplomatic status. The Japan-US agreement on technological cooperation incorporates the joint development of alternative energy sources. The military ruler stressed that the whole nation should be prepared for possible incursion from abroad. It is often pointed out that the general public is becoming indifferent to politics in Japan. Thousands of people complained about symptoms of drug-induced Sumon disease. The Pakistani president said his country is not indulging in any such activity as the development of nuclear bombs. The government may ask the people to bear a greater tax burden to help restore state finances. She says she killed her son because she couldn't put up with his cruel deeds. Discussions centered on the role of doctors in preventing medical side effects and other medical hazards. The obituary says the late Henry Fonda humorously played the role of a Navy lieutenant in the movie Mr. Roberts. The Soviet warships were spotted proceeding south through the Tsushima Strait at a speed of about 10 knots. Japan urged South Korea to refrain from fishing in the disputed area off Hokkaido. Former UN chief Kurt Waldheim won Sunday's runoff election to become Austria's president despite allegations of a Nazi past. He stressed that with proper energy-saving measures, Japan's reserve supplies could well tide the country over during the energy crisis. A total of 470 candidates vied for 154 seats in the 231-seat legislature in South Korea. An infantry division of the government forces was dispatched to help restore order in the riot-torn district. The nomination of the Prime Minister was delayed for 1 week due to infighting within the ruling party. Unit 15. Seoul says one North Korean soldier was killed by South Korean guards while trying to infiltrate into the south. Australia is regarded as one of the most promising countries in the southern hemisphere with its almost infinite natural resources. They demanded that the government take steps to stem the influx of South Korean cotton yarn into Japanese markets. The 75-year-old president seemed to be in good shape, cheerfully drinking to the health of the state guest at the banquet. Researchers were quite interested in the composition of rocks brought back from the surface of the moon. The Prime Minister reiterated that the northern islands off Hokkaido are inherent Japanese territory. The environmental protection movement was initiated by groups of local residents. Inmates at the prison are still holding out, taking some guards as hostages. A U.S. official said the Strategic Defense Initiative is designed to neutralize enemy nuclear arms and is defensive in nature. The Crown Prince and Princess attended the memorial service for the war dead on behalf of the Emperor and Empress. Under the new system, successful candidates were picked in proportion to votes collected by political parties. The company says it has already received inquiries from abroad for the newly developed technology. Consumer spending by salaried worker households increased by 2.3% in real terms between January and March. In return for their support, they expect the candidate to be more vocal on their behalf. Japan agreed to provide drought-hit Ethiopia with insecticide worth about $220,000. Ban the Bomb campaigners were greatly inspired by grassroots support for their signature collecting drive. The newly installed cabinet in the country is facing many difficult problems. The superstar is said to have an unparalleled instinct for playing football. He said the time is ripe for government offices to institute a 5-day work week. Support from the Liberal Democratic Party was instrumental in conservative candidates' victories. He said that describing the Korean independence movement in 1919 as a riot is an insult to the Korean people. This was the first foreign firm to receive permission to open a life insurance business in Japan. Insurgent movements are gaining momentum in the Caribbean country after the nation's general elections. With the sweltering summer heat continuing, the intake of water from the reservoirs has shot up. They emphasized the Soviet-held islands of Hokkaido are an integral part of the Japanese territory. Officials are checking the ingredients of the food after many people who ate it developed symptoms of poisoning. The agreement came after 2 weeks of intensive negotiations in Washington between the two countries. The conservative ruling party is intent on driving a wedge between the parties in the reformist camp. Business leaders from Japan and Australia agree that the two Pacific countries are completely interdependent. Intermittent shelling of guerrilla positions by Israeli forces was reported after the new ceasefire was reached. The Japanese company ranked second among the 500 major non-American firms in terms of sales last year. They claim that the legislation is aimed at establishing a system for national mobilization in the event of an emergency. New taxes on electricity usage and oil products should be levied to finance the plan to develop alternative energy sources. A Japanese university research team has found rich deposits of cobalt on the Pacific seabed off Japan. The report says the government should do its utmost to diversify energy sources. The coal deposits will be easy to exploit since the layer is near the Earth's surface. The Prime Minister reiterated that a national consensus is indispensable for carrying out the drastic reform. Ruling party members outnumber those of opposition parties in all parliamentary committees. The Health and Welfare Ministry says cancer topped the list of causes of deaths last year. The so-called minus ceiling for budgetary requests from government agencies was imposed in the face of expected revenue shortfalls. Unit 16. The two leaders will discuss what the two nations can do jointly in the interest of world peace. The President emphasized that the proposed tax increase will benefit the nation in the long run. The fire brigade conducted fire drills repeatedly in the wake of the recent hotel fires in the resort district. She said the United States and the Soviet Union have intimidated each other by the so-called overkill possession of nuclear arms. The Japanese and German children sang and played their traditional songs and games in turn. Inflicting heavy damage, the recent floods have inundated vast areas of the Mekong River Delta. Atomic bomb survivors have been asking the government for more help in vain. The double agent brought the country invaluable information on how to produce the neutron bomb. The monthly economic report says corporations have generally been increasing their inventories. The government is in a position of having to step up its spending cuts in view of huge deficits in state finances. The two ban-the-bomb organizations resumed talks to iron out remaining problems on the unification of the anti-nuclear movement. Discussion centered on alleged irregularities involving some Japanese firms in connection with Japan's economic aid to the Philippines. A group of Japanese youths is working on an irrigation project in the African country. The government may have to review the itinerary of the Prime Minister's visit to Europe, scheduled for next month. The two warring countries accused each other of jeopardizing the current peace negotiations. A strong earthquake jolted Japan's southernmost main island of Kyushu this afternoon. The teacher says many parents complain that they cannot keep up with their children's ideas. In his keynote speech, the professor stressed the importance of protecting the environment on a global scale. Some of the Chinese nationals of Japanese parentage were able to find their next of kin during their brief stay in Japan. Chrysler once lagged behind other U.S. automakers in the development of fuel-efficient compact cars. After being rescued, the mountaineer developed a high fever and lapsed into a coma.